I heard something moving in the valley last night. Not fast, not close, just steady, like a man dragging his boots through wet grass a long way off. I thought it might have been runoff at first. The river rises after rain, swells against the shale banks, and sets loose bits of rock that make this strange sliding sound. But the rhythm was wrong, too even, too deliberate. I killed the generator around 10, same as always. The cabin fell quiet, except for the wind pressing against the tin roof. No moon out, no light from the ridge road, just black woods all around. I listened for a while before I finally told myself it was nothing and went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again, not from a noise, just that feeling, the kind that gets you sitting up before you even know why. The night outside was still dead quiet, no crickets, no wind now, and that's when I realized it wasn't quiet enough. There's a kind of silence that doesn't belong in the mountains, the kind that feels like the forest is holding its breath, like the trees are listening for something. That's what it was. Heavy, watching silence. I pulled on my boots, grabbed the lantern, and stepped out onto the porch. The light barely reached the tree line, just a faint yellow glow on the mist hanging between the trunks. The ground was slick with dew, smelling of iron and pine rot. The sound came again, dragging, slow, down by the creek this time. I walked to the edge of the slope, lantern held high. Couldn't see anything through the fog, but the sound stopped the moment I took another step. It was as if whatever was making it knew I'd noticed. After a long minute, I called out, just my name and title, the same way we do when checking for campers after hours. The forest didn't answer. It just stayed still, heavy, waiting. That was last night. Today, the light broke through in thin strips between the clouds. I hiked down toward the creek to check for prints, just in case. The trail was soft, wet enough to hold tracks, but there was nothing. No human prints, no animal either. Just a long drag mark across the grass near the water's edge, ending abruptly at a pile of stones that hadn't been there yesterday. The pile was small, maybe knee-high, but the stones weren't from the creek. They were gray and flat, shale from higher up the slope, each one stacked with care, a little offset from the one below it, like someone had taken their time building it. I nudged the top stone with my boot. It didn't budge. The stack was balanced perfectly. I radioed it into the base post, routine field anomaly report. They said probably kids or hikers trying to leave a trail marker, but no one's camped down this way all season. The nearest maintained trail is 3 miles east. I should have felt at ease after that. I didn't. By evening, the clouds had come back, thick and dark. I stayed near the cabin, logging timber surveys by lantern light. Around 8, the radio cracked to life. Static at first, then a voice. "Ranger Unit 7, you copy?" It was clear, too clear. No interference, no background hiss, just a voice I didn't recognize. "This is Ranger Hale," I said. "Who's calling?" Static swallowed the rest. Then 3 words, faint but certain. "Check the stones." The line went dead. I waited for dispatch to call again. They didn't. I checked the radio frequency list and confirmed I was still tuned to the station channel. No other units were scheduled in my quadrant night. By 9, I couldn't sit still anymore. I took the lantern, holstered the sidearm, and walked back down the ridge trail toward the creek. The air smelled wrong this time. Sweet, almost metallic. The kind of sweetness that makes you think of rot. Fog had already settled low across the valley floor, turning the beam of my lantern into a dull glow. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. When I reached the creek, I stopped. There wasn't one stone pile anymore. There were 5. Each one was perfectly stacked, equal height, spaced in a half circle facing the slope. I checked my watch, 9:32 p.m., then crouched beside the nearest one. The stones were damp, but they weren't cold. They were warm, faintly, like something alive had been touching them. I called out again, just a calm voice in the fog. "This is Ranger Hale. Anyone out here?" Nothing, just water slipping quietly over rocks. Then I noticed something else. There were markings on the stones, lines, cuts that looked like they'd been scraped in with a blade, not random either. 3 vertical marks, and 1 horizontal across the middle, same symbol on each pile. The fog thickened, rolling down from the slope. My lantern dimmed for a moment like the air itself had swallowed the light. I turned back toward the path and froze. Someone was standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was a hiker. The figure was tall, narrow-shouldered, dressed in something dark that blended with the woods. But when I raised the lantern higher, the light didn't catch any color. It didn't even reflect off fabric. The shape just absorbed it. I called out again, voice steady. "You're on restricted ground. Identify yourself." No movement, no sound, just that stillness again, thick and waiting. Then, slowly, the shape turned. Not like a person turning their head, but like the entire forest shifted around it. One moment it faced the creek, the next it faced me, perfectly still. And then the dragging started again. Not from the figure, from behind me. I turned just in time to see the water rippling across the creek bed. Something long was moving beneath it, sliding along the bottom, stirring up mud. It stopped right at my boots. The water went still. When I looked up again, the figure in the trees was gone. I backed away, light shaking in my hand, breath clouding in the cold air. Every sound in the valley had vanished again. No river, no wind, no forest, just silence. And then, faint but deliberate, the voice came through my radio once more. "Don't turn around." The light flickered out. I didn't sleep at all after that. I waited for dawn inside the cabin, door locked, lantern lit, every window shuttered. The silence never broke, not even when the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, the fog was still there, unmoving, thick as smoke. The creek couldn't be seen anymore, but the smell of iron carried through the trees, faint and steady. And somewhere inside that fog, something was still dragging through the grass, slow, patient, and coming closer. By sunrise, the fog hadn't lifted. It just turned pale, wide and heavy, wrapped around the cabin like gauze. I stood by the window with my coffee growing cold, watching the tree line fade in and out with each slow breath of wind. I'd already radioed base 3 times since dawn. No answer. Not even static this time. The channel light came on, but there was no signal behind it. The quiet was unbearable. It wasn't peaceful, like mountain quiet. It had weight. You could feel it sitting on your shoulders, pressing against your ribs. The forest outside wasn't asleep. It was waiting. By 8:30, I decided I couldn't stay inside any longer. I took the sidearm, packed the field radio, and stepped out into the fog. The air was colder than it should have been for that hour. My breath came out in long white ribbons. I could smell water and stone again, that same metallic sweetness from the creek last night. The sound of dragging came faintly from the slope below, not constant, just once every few seconds. A pause. Then another drag, closer. I followed it down the ridge. The fog thinned in patches, revealing wet pine trunks and black moss clinging to the rocks. The forest looked older somehow, like the color had drained out of it overnight. When I reached the creek bed, the stones were gone. Every stack, every mark just vanished. The ground was churned, soft with prints that didn't make sense. Too deep for human, too narrow for animal. It looked like something had been pressing its hands, or something like hands, into the mud and pulling itself forward. Across the creek, a dark shape hung low among the trees. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it looking at me. I crossed over slowly, boots sinking into the wet silt. The smell of iron grew stronger, sharp enough to sting. The shape resolved into a structure, something built from branches, bark, and river stones. It stood about my height, maybe taller, roughly human in outline, but wrong in proportion. The arms too long, the head too flat. The whole thing looked like it had been woven together by hand, except there was no rope, no twine, just the roots, knotted tight, as if they'd grown that way. I circled it once, keeping distance. There were the same carved marks on the stones, woven into its base, 3 vertical lines, one crossing through. I touched one of the stones. It was warm again, and underneath the surface, I could feel a faint pulse. I jerked my hand back. The dragging sound came again, louder now from up the creek. Through the fog, I saw ripples spreading across the water, though nothing was visible moving beneath, just the ripples, spaced like footsteps. I didn't run. I backed up the slope slowly, watching the water, the shape, the trees. Every inch of me felt like the air was about to split open, but I forced myself to keep breathing. Halfway back to the ridge, the radio cracked alive on its own. Static, then a voice, same tone as before. Ranger hail. It wasn't a question. I stopped moving. The voice came again, softer. Why'd you move the stones? My throat went dry. Who is this? Static bled through the next words, but I caught fragments. Put them back before it comes looking. Then silence. The fog thickened instantly, as if the sound itself had drawn it closer. When I reached the cabin again, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the knob. The radio was dead completely now. At noon, I started hearing faint knocks from underneath the floorboards. 3 at a time, always 3. I told myself it was water pipes, wood swelling from the damp, anything to keep me from thinking about that voice. But around 2, the knocks came from the walls instead, then from the ceiling. By evening, the fog still hadn't lifted. The sun was just a pale shape above the ridgeline, throwing no light. The forest outside looked like a charcoal sketch, gray, uneven, unfinished. I thought about leaving. The road out was narrow but drivable, but when I stepped out onto the porch, the smell hit me again. Iron and rot, thick now, heavy. And down at the edge of the fog, just beyond where the grass turned to slope, I saw new stones stacked in a line. Not piles this time, columns. Dozens of them, leading away from the cabin into the trees. I followed them, though I couldn't tell you why. Maybe because I didn't want to wait for whatever built them to come closer. Each column was taller than the last until the final one stood at my chest. Every single stone was marked with the same carved lines, and the air around them vibrated faintly, like heat over pavement, except the temperature was dropping fast. At the base of the last stack, something had been pressed into the mud. Not carved, pressed, like a face. The impression was smooth, soft at the edges, eyes and mouth open. I crouched down, hand hovering over it, when I heard something new. Not dragging this time, breathing. Behind me, slow and steady, the sound of lungs filling. I turned, lantern shaking, and saw movement in the fog. Something tall, the outline shifting like smoke and wind. Its surface shimmered faintly, wet as stone after rain. It didn't move closer, but it straightened, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. And in that quiet, a low sound came from it, not speech exactly, just a drawn-out exhale that sounded like my own breathing, copied back a half-second late. The fog rolled between us. When it cleared, it was gone. But all the stone columns had toppled over one by one in a perfect line leading back toward the cabin. I didn't wait for dark. I packed what I could and drove out, headlights cutting through the white. The road twisted down the mountain, slick and narrow, but I didn't look in the mirrors once. Not until I reached the first ranger checkpoint miles down. When I stopped, the guard came out to meet me, blinking against my lights. He asked if I was coming off assignment early. I told him the valley was compromised, that someone or something had been building structures out there. He frowned and checked his log sheet. "There's no record of a ranger stationed in Hollow Creek this week," he said. "That post's been closed since the floods last year." I stared at him. My uniform was damp with fog. The mud on my boots was still wet. I looked back up the road, but the ridge was gone, swallowed in the white. He waved his flashlight across my windshield. "Hey," he said quietly, "you all right? You look pale." I didn't answer, because just then, through the thin mist behind the checkpoint lights, I saw something move, slow, deliberate. A line of stones stacked neatly across the ditch, running straight toward the forest. And for a moment, I thought I heard breathing again. Not mine this time. Something in the fog was practicing it, getting better. And I knew without looking that somewhere back up that ridge, the forest hadn't stopped listening. Story 2. By sunrise, the fog hadn't lifted. It just turned pale, white and heavy, wrapped around the cabin like gauze. I stood by the window with my coffee growing cold, watching the tree line fade in and out with each slow breath of wind. I had already radioed base 3 times since dawn. No answer, not even static this time. The channel light came on, but there was no signal behind it. The quiet was unbearable. It wasn't peaceful like mountain quiet. It had weight. You could feel it sitting on your shoulders, pressing against your ribs. The forest outside wasn't asleep. It was waiting. By 8:30, I decided I couldn't stay inside any longer. I took the sidearm, packed the field radio, and stepped out into the fog. The air was colder than it should have been for that hour. My breath came out in long, white ribbons. I could smell water and stone again, that same metallic sweetness from the creek last night. The sound of dragging came faintly from the slope below, not constant, just once every few seconds. A pause. Then another drag, closer. I followed it down the ridge. The fog thinned in patches, revealing wet pine trunks and black moss clinging to the rocks. The forest looked older somehow, like the color had drained out of it overnight. When I reached the creek bed, the stones were gone. Every stack, every mark, just vanished. The ground was churned, soft with prints that didn't make sense. Too deep for human, too narrow for animal. It looked like something had been pressing its hands, or something like hands, into the mud and pulling itself forward. Across the creek, a dark shape hung low among the trees. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it looking at me. I crossed over slowly, boots sinking into the wet silt. The smell of iron grew stronger, sharp enough to sting. The shape resolved into a structure, something built from branches, bark, and river stones. It stood about my height, maybe taller, roughly human in outline, but wrong in proportion. The arms too long, the head too flat. The whole thing looked like it had been woven together by hand, except there was no rope, no twine, just roots, knotted tight, as if they'd grown that way. I circled it once, keeping distance. There were the same carved marks on the stones woven into its base, 3 vertical lines, one crossing through. I touched one of the stones. It was warm again, and underneath the surface, I could feel a faint pulse. I jerked my hand back. The dragging sound came again, louder now, from up the creek. Through the fog, I saw ripples spreading across the water, though nothing was visible moving beneath. Just the ripples, space like footsteps. I didn't run. I backed up the slope slowly, watching the water, the shape, the trees. Every inch of me felt like the air was about to split open, but I forced myself to keep breathing. Halfway back to the ridge, the radio cracked, alive on its own. Static, then a voice, same tone as before. Ranger Hale. It wasn't a question. I stopped moving. The voice came again, softer. Why'd you move the stones? My throat went dry. Who is this? Static bled through the next words, but I caught fragments. Put them back, before it comes looking. Then silence. The fog thickened instantly, as if the sound itself had drawn it closer. When I reached the cabin again, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the knob. The radio was dead, completely now. At noon, I started hearing faint knocks from underneath the floorboards. 3 at a time, always 3. I told myself it was water pipes, wood swelling from the damp, anything to keep me from thinking about that voice. But around 2, the knocks came from the walls instead, then from the ceiling. By evening, the fog still hadn't lifted. The sun was just a pale shape above the ridgeline, throwing no light. The forest outside looked like a charcoal sketch, gray, uneven, unfinished. I thought about leaving. The road out was narrow but drivable, but when I stepped out onto the porch, the smell hit me again. Iron and rot, thick now, heavy. And down at the edge of the fog, just beyond where the grass turned to slope, I saw new stones stacked in a line. Not piles this time, columns. Dozens of them, leading away from the cabin into the trees. I followed them, though I couldn't tell you why. Maybe because I didn't want to wait for whatever built them to come closer. Each column was taller than the last, until the final one stood at my chest. Every single stone was marked with the same carved lines, and the air around them vibrated faintly, like heat over pavement, except the temperature was dropping fast. At the base of the last stack, something had been pressed into the mud, not carved, pressed, like a face. The impression was smooth, soft at the edges, eyes and mouth open. I crouched down, hand hovering over it, when I heard something new. Not dragging this time, breathing. Behind me, slow and steady. The sound of lungs filling. I turned, lantern shaking, and saw movement in the fog. Something tall, the outline shifting like smoke in wind. Its surface shimmered faintly, wet as stone after rain. It didn't move closer, but it straightened, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. And in that quiet, a low sound came from it. Not speech exactly, just a drawn-out exhale that sounded like my own breathing, copied back a half-second late. The fog rolled between us. When it cleared, it was gone. But all the stone columns had toppled over one by one in a perfect line leading back toward the cabin. I didn't wait for dark. I packed what I could and drove out, headlights cutting through the white. The road twisted down the mountain, slick and narrow, but I didn't look in the mirrors once, not until I reached the first ranger checkpoint miles down. When I stopped, the guard came out to meet me, blinking against my lights. He asked if I was coming off assignment early. I told him the valley was compromised, that someone or something had been building structures out there. He frowned and checked his log sheet. There's no record of a ranger stationed in Hollow Creek this week, he said. That post's been closed since the floods last year. I stared at him. My uniform was damp with fog. The mud on my boots was still wet. I looked back up the road, but the ridge was gone, swallowed in the white. He waved his flashlight across my windshield. "Hey," he said quietly, "you all right? You look pale." I didn't answer, because just then, through the thin mist behind the checkpoint lights, I saw something move, slow, deliberate. A line of stones stacked neatly across the ditch, running straight toward the forest. And for a moment, I thought I heard breathing again. Not mine this time. Something in the fog was practicing it, getting better. And I knew without looking that somewhere back up that ridge, the forest hadn't stopped listening. The rain started again sometime after midnight. It came slow, like mist at first, then steadier, thin sheets tapping against the tin roof of the ranger cabin. I hadn't meant to fall asleep, but I must have. When I woke, the lantern on the desk had burned itself out, and the air felt colder than before. My shirt was damp with sweat, but the window glass was fogged with condensation from the chill outside. The clock on the wall had stopped at 2:37 a.m. I remember thinking it must have been the battery, but when I reached up to check it, the second hand started ticking again on its own. That was when I heard it. The sound wasn't loud, just a faint scraping under the floorboards. At first it blended with the rain, but then it came again, slow and deliberate, like something was tracing the underside of the cabin with a nail. Once, pause, twice, pause, then 3 quick scrapes, close together. I froze. The wind outside shifted direction, and the fog pressed harder against the window panes as if it was breathing against the glass. The forest beyond had gone completely dark. No moonlight, no movement. I told myself it was an animal, raccoons maybe. The foundation beams weren't sealed, and the understructure was wide enough for one to crawl beneath. Still, no animal made sounds that steady. that patterned. I put on my boots and grabbed the flashlight. Its beam flickered once before holding steady. When I opened the cabin door, the cold hit me hard. Wet air and the sharp mineral scent that had been following me since I'd arrived. The fog was worse than before. I could barely see past the porch railing. I stepped down slowly, sweeping the light across the ground. The rain had stopped again, but drops still fell from the trees in irregular rhythms. The mud was thick, glossy, and pale under the flashlight. Then I saw them. Handprints. Half-formed impressions pressed into the soil beneath the porch. Each one had 4 fingers, but no thumb. The prints stretched in a line from the edge of the tree line straight toward the cabin, then under it. They were deep, too deep for any person to have left without tools. Something had crawled up from the forest and wedged itself beneath the floor while I slept. The flashlight shook in my hand. I crouched low and shone the beam beneath the porch. The light hit empty space, then the underside of the cabin. Nothing moved, but the smell of iron was heavier there, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The beam passed over something pale, round and smooth, like a stone. I leaned lower, squinted. It wasn't a stone. It was a face. Or rather, something shaped like one, half buried in the mud, features too soft, almost melted, eyes open but hollow, mouth parted in a silent gasp. And then, just for a second, it moved. The mud around it shifted like breath exhaling. I stumbled back and dropped the flashlight. It landed lens down, beam spinning wild arcs through the fog. The light caught something behind the cabin, further into the trees. A tall shape, perfectly still. It wasn't solid. It flickered with the fog, its edges bleeding in and out of the white. But it had height and weight. When the flashlight beam brushed over it, the air hummed. The figure tilted slightly, as though watching me. Yeah. I snatched the flashlight up and backed toward the door, heart pounding. I couldn't see its face, if it had one, but I could tell it was leaning forward, the way a person might when trying to see in low light. Then it took one slow step. The sound wasn't a footstep. It was a drag, like wet cloth over stone. Another step. The fog rippled with its movement. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt. The silence afterward was worse. The only sound was the clock ticking again. The second hand still trembled faintly at 2:39. I didn't sleep again. By dawn, the fog had thinned, but not enough to see the full tree line. I packed my gear, shoved it all in the truck, and radioed base again. Nothing. Just the faint crackle of static, then a hollow pop, like a voice trying to form but not quite reaching through. When I pulled out onto the service road, the tires left deep grooves in the mud. Every turn looked the same, trees crowding closer, branches brushing against the side mirrors. At mile marker 8, I had to stop. The road was blocked, not by a fallen tree this time, but by stones. Dozens of them, stacked chest high in a pattern that stretched across the width of the road. Some were smooth, some jagged, all slick with moisture. Each one had those same carved marks, 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal slash. The same symbol from the structures in the valley. I got out of the truck, engine idling behind me, and approached slowly. The air was colder here, unnaturally still. As I got closer, the smell hit me again. Wet stone and iron. The stones looked freshly placed, mud still clinging to their bases. But what stopped me wasn't the stacks themselves. It was what was between them. Patches of disturbed soil, pressed into a perfect spiral pattern, like something had been circling as it worked. I crouched, studying them. The spirals weren't footprints, but there were depressions, deep ones, where the soil had given under heavy pressure. Each indentation was narrow, elongated, almost like a handprint that stretched. Then, faintly, I heard it again. Breathing, slow and steady. Coming from the forest just beyond the stone barrier. It didn't sound human. It was too rhythmic, too precise, like someone imitating breathing after studying it for too long. I stood up and backed away. The fog thickened, swallowing the trees one by one. The sound moved closer. Something brushed against the stones from the other side. The stacks shivered, but didn't topple. Then a voice came. Not through the trees this time. Not through the radio. It came from the fog itself. Ranger Hale. The same voice as before, calm, distant, hollow. You shouldn't have left them. I froze. Who is this? Silence. Then, softer. It doesn't like being seen. The nearest stack shifted. A stone rolled down, landing inches from my boot. It was warm, pulsing faintly. I turned and got back in the truck. As I reversed, I caught one last glimpse through the mirror. Something tall was standing in the fog now, just behind the stones. It wasn't moving. But the fog around it was folding inward, as if drawn toward it. I hit the gas and drove until the signal on my radio came alive again, somewhere near the base of the ridge. A burst of static, then a man's voice. Hollow Creek Outpost, come in. Hale, that you? I almost laughed in relief. Yeah, I'm here. I'm coming down. There's someone up near the ridge. The posts, the stones. The voice cut me off. Hale, you're not assigned to Hollow Creek. What? Static again, then clearer. That site's been closed since last winter. Flooding wiped the cabin out months ago. My stomach turned cold. I've been there for 3 nights, I said. The cabin's intact. The voice on the radio didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, it said, we pulled everything from that valley. The whole ridge went unstable. There's nothing left to station anyone there. I looked out the windshield. The road behind me was gone again, swallowed by fog. The same pale fog that had followed me from the creek. When I finally reached the next checkpoint, I got out shaking. The ranger on duty, Miller, a guy I'd worked with before, took one look at me and frowned. Jesus, Hale, you look like you've seen a ghost. I didn't answer right away. My hands were trembling. You're telling me Hollow Creek isn't active? He blinked. Hasn't been for almost a year. You sure you didn't take a wrong turn? I told him about the cabin, the radio, the stones, the voice, the face under the floorboards. Miller's face stayed still while I talked. When I was done, he rubbed his jaw. There's nothing out there anymore, man, he said quietly. The only thing left up that way is mud and rock. They cleared it after the flood. Even pulled the foundation beams. He offered to show me the maps. I didn't want to look, but I nodded. He brought them out. Old survey charts and updated ones. On the most recent map, the Hollow Creek Outpost wasn't even listed. Just a gray scar where the slope had collapsed. I traced the road with my finger. I was right here, I said. The valley, the creek, My voice caught. Because where I'd spent 3 nights, where the cabin had stood, was marked as floodplain, under 5 feet of water. I didn't say another word. Miller offered me a cot and said to rest. Before heading back down the range, I lay there for hours, eyes open, listening to the rain on the roof. At some point, I drifted off. When I woke again, the window was fogged over from the inside. And in the condensation, someone had drawn 3 vertical lines and one crossing through. That night, I left the range entirely, drove until the mountains disappeared behind me. But sometimes, when I pull over at rest stops or listen to the rain hit the roof of the truck, I swear I can hear it again, just faintly. The breathing, slow, steady, practicing, getting better. And somewhere in the static of the radio that never seems to stay dead, the voice always returns. Ranger hail. Then the line goes silent, and the air grows cold. Because even out here, miles from Hollow Creek, I still smell it. That metallic sweetness, the scent of stone. And I know the fog hasn't forgotten me. It's just learning how to find me again. Story 3. By the time I took over at Black Hollow Lookout, the mountain already felt like it had decided it didn't want people there. There were things you noticed right away. How sound didn't carry right. How the echo of your boots felt delayed, like it was waiting for you to stop before it followed. The air itself seemed heavier than normal, thicker in your lungs. I started in late October, 2 weeks after the last ranger rotated down. They said he left early because of equipment trouble, which was the kind of phrase that covered everything from a busted generator to a nervous breakdown. My first night up there, I heard the radio click on by itself. Just a soft, static hiss, no voice, no channel ID. It stayed that way for 5 solid minutes before cutting out on its own. I didn't report it. Everyone up here had stories about weird radio signals the mountains bounce transmissions around in ways no one really understands. But this one had a rhythm to it, like it wasn't random static at all, almost like breathing. The lookout tower was 30 feet tall, bolted into the ridge where 3 old service roads used to meet. The forest stretched unbroken for miles. Nothing but black pines, wet wind, and fog that moved like it was alive. My job was simple: night watch, weather logging, and emergency dispatch if needed. For the first few nights, everything stayed quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Then the radio started talking again. It happened around 1:12 a.m., exactly the same time 3 nights in a row. The signal would come in mid-sentence, like I was joining a conversation already happening. You hear that? No, it's closer now, by the ridge. Just keep your light low. Every time, the same voices. 2 men, 1 woman. Never any call signs. Never a clear origin. On the 5th night, I decided to respond. This is Ranger Kellen from Black Hollow Tower. Identify yourselves. No answer. Just a long burst of static, then a whisper. You're not supposed to reply. Then the line went dead. I switched the radio off, but the whisper didn't stop. It kept going, faint, like it was bleeding through the power line itself. I didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, fog had rolled in from the valley. It hung below the tower like a white sea, swallowing the forest. I brewed coffee and logged wind speed, trying not to think about the radio. Mid-morning, I went down the trail to check the relay box, an old metal cabinet mounted into a cedar post. The door was open when I found it. Inside, all the wires were intact, but there was something else tucked between them. A piece of paper, folded twice. I unfolded it carefully. 3 words, written in graphite and smudged by damp. You heard them. No signature. The next night, the radio came alive again, only this time there were more voices, layers of them, like multiple channels bleeding together, men, women, even what sounded like a child. Help me. Still there, still watching. We can see the tower lights. I switched frequencies one by one, but the voices stayed exactly the same, like they weren't tied to any frequency at all. And somewhere under all that noise, there was another sound, barely audible, a low hum. It came in slow, then grew stronger, steady and pulsing like a generator. But the generator was off. When the hum hit a certain pitch, the tower lights dimmed. My coffee mug rattled against the desk. Then silence. The forest outside didn't move. Not even the trees swayed. When I finally stepped outside, the air was charged, like before lightning. The fog glowed faintly in the beam of my flashlight, even though there shouldn't have been any light source to catch. Halfway down the tower steps, I heard it again. Not the hum, the voice. But it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It came from the tree line. Kellen. It said my name. I froze halfway down the steps, light pointed into the dark. Nothing. No movement, no reflection. You heard them. It was the same whisper as before. The same tone, the same pacing. I backed up the stairs, one slow step at a time, not daring to look away from the trees. At the top, I shut and locked the hatch, pulled the shutters closed, and waited. The radio remained off, but the voice didn't stop. You shouldn't have replied. It faded after a few minutes, or maybe I stopped hearing it. By morning, the static is back on its own again. I turned the dial. No station, no weather bands, nothing. Just that hum, steady as the heartbeat. I tried the handheld back up. Same sound. Then I noticed something odd on the window glass. Condensation had gathered in lines, parallel streaks, like fingerprints dragged down from the top. There were 4 of them, each one about the width of a human finger. Except they were on the outside, and I hadn't opened a window all night. The forest below looked wrong that day. The fog didn't move the way fog should. It held its shape, rippling only when I stared too long. I considered hiking down to base camp, but the valley road was closed for repairs, and the backup route took 6 hours on foot. Besides, protocol said to stay put unless there was a confirmed emergency. At sunset, the hum came back, stronger than before. The floor of the tower vibrated with it. My lantern flickered once, then twice, before dying completely. And through the dark, the radio clicked on again by itself. No static this time, just breathing. Deep, steady, human breathing. Then a new voice, clear and close. We found the tower. A pause. But we don't see you. The sound came from both the radio and outside, and overlapping, the same tone, the same volume. I turned off the radio. The breathing didn't stop. I turned off the generator. The breathing didn't stop. I switched on my flashlight and aimed it toward the window. At first, I saw nothing, just fog and reflection. Then I realized there was another reflection behind mine. A face in the glass, pale and thin, lips moving without sound. Its mouth opened and closed in sync with the breathing. I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up again, the face was gone. The glass was clear. But the condensation had changed. Now there were words written in the fog, tuned to 7.13. I hesitated only a second before doing it. Static roared back, deafening and bright. The air in the tower seemed to compress. Then, faintly, beneath the noise, something spoke. Not in English, not any language I recognized. Low, guttural tones, rhythmic, like chanting through water. The hum rose higher, shaking the metal beams of the tower. I killed the power and threw the switch for the generator. The noise cut instantly. And when silence returned, it wasn't empty. Something in the forest was still humming. I didn't sleep at all that night. By dawn, there was a new message on the glass. 6 words this time. They're climbing. Don't answer anymore. And down below, faintly through the fog, I could see movement at the base of the tower. Shapes shifting between the trees, their outlines flickering in and out like weak radio signals. They never came closer, not that morning. But I could tell they were waiting for me to speak again. By the second night, I'd stopped pretending that the sounds meant nothing. The forest had gone too still. Even the crickets had given up. It was the kind of silence that presses down like fog, that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every inch of skin touching the air. I stayed awake through the morning and most of the afternoon, trying to decide what to do. My eyes kept drifting toward the radio. Though I'd unplugged it completely, the dial still glowed faintly blue. At 4 p.m., I heard something new. A voice, but not from the radio this time. It came through the ventilation shaft behind the desk, muffled, close. "We can see the tower." The same words I'd heard before, only now they were coming from inside. I didn't move for a long time, just listened. The sound faded like someone walking away down a hallway that wasn't there. When I finally opened the hatch to check, the vent was empty. Cold air poured out like a sigh. By dusk, I'd decided to head down the ridge toward the old maintenance shed. There was an emergency relay phone there, wired to the main line by underground cable. Maybe it still worked. I packed light, flashlight, sidearm, handheld compass, extra batteries, and one of the ranger logs in case I needed to record what was happening. I didn't bother with the field radio. I couldn't bear to hear it again. The trail down to the shed wound through thick pines, so close together that light could barely reach the ground. The air smelled like wet bark and copper. Every few minutes, I'd hear a low popping sound, branches bending under weight. Half a mile down, I stopped to rest. That's when I noticed it. The hum. It wasn't coming from ahead of me anymore. It was below, like the mountain itself had started to vibrate. I crouched, pressed a hand to the soil. The ground was warm. Then, faintly through the fog, I saw a light ahead, pale, steady, hovering just above the path. I turned my flashlight toward it, and the beam split. It bent around the light, as if the air there wasn't normal. I took a step closer. The hum deepened. My chest felt heavy. The flashlight flickered. And then the voice came again, clear, as if someone stood a foot away. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice wasn't over the radio this time. It came from the trees. "Go back to the tower. I turned slowly, sweeping the light through the pines. For a split second, I caught movement, something shifting between the trunks, tall and thin, pale against the dark bark. Then it was gone. The hum cut off like a switch had been flipped. Silence again. When I finally reached the shed, the door was hanging open. Inside, dust hung in the air like smoke. The relay phone sat on a small table in the corner, covered in a film of grime. I picked up the receiver. Nothing. No dial tone, no static, just a faint crackle like distant fire. Then, barely audible, my name. Kellen. I dropped the receiver. It swung on its cord, tapping against the metal frame with each pass. I stared at it until it stopped moving, then I backed out of the shed. Outside, the fog had thickened again, white and suffocating. My flashlight beam stopped barely 3 feet ahead. I started back up the trail, keeping to the path by memory. Each step felt heavier, like gravity had thickened. Halfway up, I heard the hum again, closer this time, pulsing through the fog. It wasn't coming from any direction I could point to. It was everywhere. And beneath it, something else. Voices. Hundreds of them, layered so tightly together they almost formed a single tone. We hear you. You called us. Stay on the line. I ran. Branches scraped my arms, tore at my sleeves. The fog felt thicker the faster I moved, like it was trying to hold me back. When I reached the base of the tower, the light inside was on. I hadn't left it on. I climbed fast, 2 rungs at a time. The metal shuddered under my boots. When I reached the top, I stopped dead. The door was open. Inside, the radio was turned on. And from the speaker came a voice I knew, my own. Kellen from Black Hollow Tower. Identify yourselves. The exact words I'd spoken days ago, playing back perfectly, down to the breath between them. I unplugged the unit. It kept talking. Don't answer anymore. Then static, a rising whine, and silence. The light flickered once. And in that moment, I saw something move outside the window. Not far, just at the edge of the fog, a tall silhouette standing perfectly still. Another behind it, then another, a dozen at least, faint outlines in the mist, all facing the tower. Their shapes shimmered faintly like heat mirage through cold air. I watched for nearly an hour. None of them moved. Then, slowly, one of them raised its arm. And the radio came back on. Don't make them speak again. It wasn't my voice this time. It was the same whisper that had followed me since the first night. You heard them. Now they hear you. The lights dimmed, and the fog outside began to pulse in rhythm with the hum, each wave brighter than the last. I sat at the desk, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles ached. The air felt electric. The hum rose again, louder, faster, until it filled the tower completely. My teeth buzzed. The windows vibrated. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. No sound, no light. Outside, the fog glowed faintly. Every shape was gone. All that remained were faint impressions in the soil below. Dozens of human-sized outlines burned dark into the earth. I didn't move until dawn. When the light finally came through the trees, I saw something new on the glass. Handprints, dozens of them. Each one pressed from the inside. I climbed down the tower and started down the mountain road without packing anything. The forest was quiet again, but it didn't feel natural. It felt emptied out. Halfway down, I passed a sign I didn't recognize. It looked new. Fresh paint, straight edges. Black Hollow Lookout closed until further notice. Someone had nailed an old radio microphone to the post beneath the sign. The cord trailed into the woods, disappearing into the fog. I didn't follow it. I reached base by evening, filthy and shaking. The ranger at the desk barely looked up when I entered. He said something about off-season closures and paperwork confusion. Then he frowned. "You said you're from Black Hollow?" I nodded. He checked his logbook. "We don't have that site listed anymore. That tower was torn down 2 years ago, lightning strike." I just stood there, mud drying on my boots, trying to understand what he was saying. He gave me a tired look. "You sure you got the right mountain, son?" I didn't answer. He picked up his radio to call the district chief. As soon as he pressed the button, static filled the room. It wasn't normal static. It was breathing. Slow, steady. The same pattern I'd been hearing for days. He let go of the button, confused. Tried again. The breathing stopped. I stepped backward, toward the door. Outside, the fog had followed me down from the ridge, thin at first, then thicker as I watched. I could hear faint voices in it. "Stay on the line. Don't hang up." When I looked back at the ranger, he was tapping the side of his radio, frowning at the noise. He said, "That's odd. It's coming through the weather channel." The light on his console flickered once. 7.13 megahertz. The same frequency burned into my memory. The fog pressed against the glass now, pale and swirling. And underneath the sound of static, just before I turned and walked out the door, I heard one more voice. My own. We found the tower. I drove until I reached the highway, never looking in the mirrors once. But some nights, when the signal skips between stations and the static deepens, I hear it again, my name slow and distant. Kellen. And in that half second of dead air before another channel takes over, I swear I can hear the breathing. Still there, still waiting, still on the line.